The idea of officially honoring Black history goes back to 1915, and historian Carter Woodson, who hoped to raise awareness of African Americans' contributions to civilization. The celebration was expanded to a month in 1976, when President Gerald Ford urged all Americans to honor accomplishments of Black Americans. It's sad to say, but we may need the reminder now more than ever. Recent polls show that most Americans believe civil rights have taken a huge backward step in the past 5 years. In one, 68% of those surveyed said they believe civil rights in America have regressed. A majority say they do celebrate Black History Month, but 69% say they wish they had learned more when they were children. But it's never too late. And on this week's In Depth, we honor the contributions of Black Americans and showcase some of the recent stories we've done on the subject here on Fox 11. Fox 11 News In Depth starts right now. Hello, everyone. I'm Hal Eisner, and welcome to Fox 11 News In Depth. This week, we are celebrating Black History Month, which is the month of February. We're at Charles Drew University here in the South LA County area, and lucky us, my friend and colleague, Tony McEwing, joining us this week to talk about all of this. And good to have you, man.
It's good to be here. It's good to see you, Hal. I don't get to see you much.
Yeah, our shifts are a little different. You know, Black History Month is such a significant thing. You and I have done stories about this for years and years and years. And some of our colleagues have done some great stories this month we want to showcase during our program this week. Yours among them about this very place we're at. So let me have you set it up.
Well, this is a particularly impressive institution. We're in what's known as the simulation room. This is where students work on what I would call medical mannequins, learning their trade. This is a really incredible place. A lot of people, first of all, don't even know who Charles Drew was. Charles Drew was an African-American physician who developed a method of storing and preserving blood. Now, before he did that, where and when you could do blood transfusions, it was very limited, very limited. Once he developed this method, you could pretty much do blood transfusions anywhere, anytime.
Right.
And that saved thousands and thousands of Allied lives during World War II and millions of lives since then. And this university, this institution, is determined to uphold that legacy. Take a look. August 11th, 1965, the beginning of one of the most explosive events in Los Angeles history. The Watts Riots, also known as the Watts Uprising, a rebellion against police brutality and widespread discrimination. By the time it was over 6 days later, the violence had done more than $40 million in property damage, left 34 people dead and more than 1,000 injured.
Okay. So now what's the next step?
But from the death, destruction, and disillusionment, a few rays of hope. One of the brightest, Charles R. Drew School of Medicine and Science in Willowbrook in South Los Angeles County.
The only reason we're here is to address the needs of the community that were voiced during the Watts Uprising. We're a community founded, we're community serving. We want to make sure that we're community focused. We are indeed a private university focusing on this public mission of importance in community health care.
Founded in 1966 as a direct result of the Watts Uprising, Charles Drew University, CDU as it's known, is often referred to as LA's hidden gem, a beacon of light for communities where quality health care is sorely lacking for people who often need it the most.
When you look at disparities, this region is at the bottom in Los Angeles County for virtually every metric on health care that you can imagine.
The statistics are sobering to say the least. African Americans live fewer years on average than whites. They're also more likely to die from treatable conditions. They are invariably at higher risk for chronic diseases like diabetes and high blood pressure. And COVID has only made things worse.
It can be a beta cell or a killer T cell.
CDU is trying to change that. The only historically black college and university west of Texas, more than 80% of the students and 71% of the faculty here are people of color. The second most diverse private four-year nonprofit college in the nation. That's important to nursing student Amaya Chapman.
When you're in a place where it's specifically made for minorities, you feel like the majority. And I think that's a comfortable setting to be in, to where you can actually focus on what you're learning and not necessarily what you're being a representation of.
Over the last 55 years, CDU has graduated more than 600 physicians and thousands of other healthcare professionals, including nurses, nurse practitioners, and physician assistants. But perhaps what's even more remarkable is that over 85% of those graduates say they plan to set up shop and provide care to underserved communities.
Fascinating piece, really interesting, Tony.
Yeah, and even more fascinating is that CDU is a phenomenal research institution focusing specifically on underserved populations who are often underrepresented in clinical trials and studies. So you can only imagine how vitally important that is.
So important to know this information. Not all of this history has been so positive. Here, take a look at this right here. And let me just tell you, California's had a history of so-called sundown towns, places where black people and minorities were excluded at night through laws, harassment, and sometimes violence. One of those cities was Glendale. Koco McAboy explains how the city has now become a trailblazer in recognizing its troubled history.
At the Glendale Central Library, curator Ara Oshagan sorts through boxes filled with newspaper articles, photos, and documents, all showing Glendale's troubled past.
People who have been around know something about Glendale's racist past. They know that some things happened in different places in the city, but nobody really knew exactly the details, or nobody really delved into it.
Until 2020, following the murder of George Floyd, curators, librarians, and archivists unearthed the documents at the library to create an exhibit called Reckoning. Library Director Gary Schaefer.
Librarians don't forget. We keep information, and I think what the team did that was very unique is they took what could be really dry information and they really made it accessible to people.
The online exhibit, with videos and guides, details the city's history as a decades-long hub for the American Nazi Party and the Ku Klux Klan, the KKK holding rallies in Glendale as recent as the 1980s. The archives also proving Glendale was one of many sundown towns in California and throughout the nation.
A sundown town is a city or town that is all white on purpose, so uses informal and formal means to keep African Americans and other people of color out of the city.
Though there was no official law on the books, Glendale excluded black people through informal policies and police intimidation, preventing black residents from buying property or simply being in the city at nighttime.
We didn't have Jim Crow in California, but we had sundown town laws.
Tara Peterson, the CEO of the YWCA Glendale and Pasadena, is one of the powerful voices behind remedying Glendale's past.
We really need to talk about issues of race in our community. We need to talk about the issues that people of color experience.
Peterson and community leaders formed the Coalition for an Anti-Racist Glendale and drafted a historic sundown town resolution.
We have to first acknowledge our history, and we have to apologize and atone for it.
Glendale City Council passed the resolution in 2020, making Glendale the first city in California to do so, and just the third in the nation.
It becomes a tool. It becomes a tool to advocate for other changes. So as the city of Glendale is looking at its policies and practices around housing, as it's looking at its policies and practices around economic and businesses, we're able to now say, hey, remember you passed the Sundown Town Resolution?
The cities of Burbank and South Pasadena, both former sundown towns, passed similar resolutions after Glendale's move.
It has inspired other communities to follow suit, and that is, feels really good to be a part of a city that stepped up to do the right thing.
You know, another interesting slice of life in the past from Koco McAboy. All right.
What a story.
Coming up next on Fox 11 News in Depth, we take you to a part of Los Angeles with a rich history, Sugar Hill. It was one of the wealthiest enclaves of black society in the early days of the 20th century, but where's it now? We'll tell you right after this break. Don't go away. Welcome back to Fox 11 News in Depth. I'm Hal Eisner, joined by Tony McEwing, our morning anchor here on Fox 11. And, you know, it's interesting about Black History Month. Back in 1926, it became Black History Week from an earlier celebration. And then 50 years later, 1976, a full month. And that's important, isn't it?
I think it's a good thing. I mean, obviously, Black history can be celebrated, history and culture can be celebrated any day of the week, any month of the year. But I think it's good to have a designated month where we can collectively be of the same mindset to celebrate
it's like a laser
Black
beam.
history. Yeah,
Be
celebrate
focused.
Black history and talk about the issues that are of concern to the Black community.
You know, as long as I've been in this town, I thought I'd been in every neighborhood that there is to be. But I want to take a look at some video right here, because if you picture this, Duke Ellington, Count Basie, performing at a house belonging to the first black woman to ever win an Oscar, Hattie McDaniel. That home was in a local neighborhood. It was called Sugar Hill. For this neighborhood to be what it is, the people had to fight. The way Brooke Thomas puts it, their fight changed our nation.
Just a few miles west from the heart of Los Angeles lies a story of what once was the West Adams community of Sugar Hill.
They were naming it after Harlem Sugar Hill, 1920, because it was a sweet place to live.
Sugar Hill holds a special place in Ivan Houston's heart. It plays a big part in his family story. He says his grandfather, Norman Oliver Masson Houston, was the first black person ever to buy a home in the neighborhood around 80 years ago. Soon after, a number of prominent black business owners, doctors, lawyers, and famous actresses followed.
Hattie McDaniel moved in, Louise Beavers moved in, Dr. Frank Summerfield, who owned the Dunbar Hotel on Central, moved in. My wife's grandparents, Dr. Pyram Taylor and his wife, Pearl, moved in and lived across the street from my grandfather. Ethel Waters moved in.
Their white neighbors weren't happy about this, and they felt like they had a right to be upset. Racist restrictions were embedded into property deeds here and all over the United States. These were clauses written into homeowners' deeds proclaiming if they sold the property, they wouldn't sell to black people, keeping them all from the integration they didn't want.
My home right now in Silver Lake, built in 1926, it has that clause in its deed. But by then, you know, when we bought it, it's unlawful now.
The white homeowners sued the black homeowners, claiming it was illegal for them to be there. In response, the black homeowners banded together, creating the West Adams Neighborhood Protective Association.
To talk about it, to hire a lawyer to do this. And they did. You see what the dues were? Yeah. $1.50, 50 cents. But it was enough.
Houston and his wife found a written record of all the members from 1943 through 1947. This small group helped overcome the injustice, but they had some big help from NAACP lawyer Lauren Miller.
He was just that type of lawyer that would take this cause on because even he knew it was wrong.
Miller argued the racist covenants violated the 14th Amendment, which guaranteed his clients equal protection under the law. The judge agreed. Soon after that, black Americans were all over West Adams, even moving in an exclusive gated community in the middle of Sugar Hill, Berkeley Square.
From Western to about Gramercy was an area called Berkeley Square, and it had homes as big as Fremont Place, Hancock Park. Probably in the 50s, and that's when African Americans could move into the neighborhood.
Where's Berkeley Square now? Well, right here, or at least it was. Now, of course, you're looking at the middle of the Santa Monica Freeway.
This 10 freeway, which is, of course, a major artery for Los Angeles now, would bisect and divide and essentially destroy what was, at the time, the most prosperous African-American community in Los Angeles, one of the most prosperous on the West Coast. There's absolutely no question that it destroyed the neighborhood. I mean, it fundamentally changed what this neighborhood was about. It had a negative effect on property values, particularly on that side. And it, I think, killed what was once a really vibrant cultural thing.
The neighborhood, now split in two, Berkeley Square homes were seized through eminent domain. Those families had to leave. For those who got to stay in their houses, the freeway brought longer walks to schools, noise, crime, and most importantly, health issues that perpetuate for generations.
For people who are living on the edge of the freeway or by the port, they're exposed to all these toxins at a much greater rate, and so you see higher rates of asthma and cancer and things like that. It's a common problem.
Decades later, a story still not widely taught.
None of it was in class, not one bit. In fact, I'm really thankful that this type of story is getting out there because it's so important.
And as you were watching that, your thoughts?
Well, it's a fascinating and disturbing part of our history, but at the same time, it's a story that has been repeated many times in this nation, not just Sugar Hill, Black Wall Street in Oklahoma, communities in Florida, New York, Illinois. I could go on and on and on. How many times we've seen this happen?
How many times? All right, coming up next on Fox 11 News In Depth, Tony and I will join a couple more of our colleagues, Koco McAboy and Brooke Thomas, who have deeply personal takes on what Black History Month means. Koco, Brooke, Tony, and I will be back right after this break. Welcome back to Fox 11 News in Depth. I'm Hal Eisner. Tony McEwing right by my side. We're talking about Black History Month, and two more of our colleagues are going to join the chat here.
I love them both.
I love them both, too. Brooke Thomas and Koco McAboy. What great stories you guys have produced during this very important month, and information that even old veterans like this guy right here didn't know about. So, why don't we just start with Brooke, and tell us a little bit about, your story, what brought this to your attention, and how you kind of got there.
The big thing, Tony kind of mentioned it, that this has happened everywhere. And I am from Muskogee, Oklahoma, which is right outside of Tulsa. And so I grew up hearing, not in school, but from my grandparents and my mom and aunts and uncles about, what happened in North Tulsa, Black Wall Street, Greenwood, Archer, Pine. And so obviously the Tulsa Race Massacre and what was lost. And so I had this idea of finding that here locally. And I think even as working on the story, it just kept getting bigger and bigger and even more surprising. For me, it was powerful. Can I tell you something about it that I haven't shared yet? The man that I spoke
to,
of course. Right? Ivan, the grandson of the first Black man to buy a house in the West Adams area there, his wife, they met 30 years ago on a blind date, start talking, and turns out her grandmother also was one of the first Black people to buy a house there. She was the secretary of the Neighborhood Protection Association. His grandfather was the president, and their names are in that booklet stacked on every page together. And how is that? That is such a wild story to me, that they both have this same family history.
And so much history, and history on top of history. And just a few seconds of a personal reflection here, Brooke, about what this month means to you deeply.
It's the present. That's what it means to me. I know it's about history, and so many people are learning things, and we're learning things ourselves. But I think that for me, I have needed so much in my career having a Tony. And I could go on and on about how supportive Tony has been to me. And Koco is one of my best friends. And I think working with Daryl, our producer, on this, you have this space where you're validated. Oh, these stories matter. We can talk about this. And it's about the present for me, because in so many ways it's easy to talk about the history and say you care about the history, but then not care about what's in front of you. And so it's nice for me to be able to reflect and have those people around me.
Koco, let me ask you about Sundown Towns. I honestly did not know a lot about that. Tony did, and filled me in a little bit as a piece was playing, but this was something new to me. How did you get there on your story?
And I think that that's what's interesting, is I think that the idea of the Sundown Towns is new to a lot of people. I always grew up knowing about Sundown Towns because of my parents. My dad is from the South. He's from Alabama, so he would talk a lot about Sundown Towns. And when this story idea came up about doing a story on Sundown Towns, the history of it in California, it really stood out to me because I had learned so much about it during my childhood, but also because I think a lot of people don't know about Sundown Towns. And the reality is, though it's a part of our past, it's still very much so a part of our present as well, because some of those informal policies are still part of our society today and still impact Black people.
You know, Tony was telling me there that in Chicago, it was the word Sundown Town meant sundown, you were home. Yeah. And that was just the bottom line. But let me ask you, Koco, your feelings during a month like Black History Month here in February.
I really have to echo what Brooke was saying, because Brooke is one of my best friends, and having people at the station like Brooke and Tony and Christine Devine and Michaela here, all being able to reflect on stories during Black History Month, it really means a lot, because you feel like you have that support, but also Black History Month is about the present. It's about the fact that although we have a very important and rich history, we also have a very important and rich future. And it's important to focus on Black achievement as well, and some of the organizations that are pushing for change.
Wow. You know, Tony, your thoughts on Black history?
Well, at the risk of repeating some of what's been said, all of these stories are why Black History Month is so important. We have to remember the past so we don't repeat it. We want to celebrate the good, but we also want to consider the future and the things that we still need to work on.
You know, you often hear, like in the Jewish community, never again, when it relates to the Holocaust. And that's what I think I hear you saying a little bit.
Yeah, because you know what? Generations of kids don't know about these things. And so Black History Month is a time, if they don't learn it in school, and a lot of schools don't teach these things, Black History Month is a great time for them to learn about things that are so vitally important to their culture and to their very survival.
All right. Brooke, Koco, Tony, thanks so much for being with us this week. And Fox 11 News in Depth continues right after this break. Don't go away. And if you haven't already, check out my podcast called What the Hal. It's available wherever you subscribe to podcasts, or just go to whatthehalpodcast.com. And you can listen to this week's program in your car. That's it for this week's Fox 11 News in Depth. Thanks for joining us, and have a great week, everybody. See you next time. Bye-bye.